Week number 12 of the NFL season is officially here, so in today's video, let's go ahead and try and predict every single game of week number 12. Now, in case you guys are curious, my current record is 107-59, so that's pretty impressive. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button, but let's just hop right into it. And we are going to begin with our Thursday night football game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns. This game should be, in theory, not a very close game. The Browns are not a good team at all, whereas Pittsburgh is a good team. However, the Pittsburgh Steelers have had a little bit of some notoriety on losing these type of games. They kind of call it a Mike Tomlin game, you could say. It's typically a game where the Pittsburgh Steelers have a really positive record. Maybe they're riding a winning streak or they're just having some really good momentum, and then they go up against a bad or not so good team and they for some reason lose. And I kind of feel like this could be one of those sort of trap games for the Steelers team. I'm not going to predict it to be a loss for the Steelers because I do think the Steelers are a different team than what they have been the past couple years, but I want to say this is easily a trap game for the Steelers. That all said, I do think Russell Wilson will find success. I think the ground game will be there, and I think defensively they're going to make Jameis Winston look very pedestrian all night. So with that said, I'm going to pick the Steelers to win 28-14. Then we move over to our Sunday games, beginning with our 12 o'clock window with the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans. Again, kind of similar to the Browns game. This game shouldn't be very close in theory. However, I think it could be close for some part of the game. The Titans have a good defense, but offensively speaking, they're just not very good. Will Levis has played a tad bit better lately, but it still hasn't been really all that good. It hasn't resulted in any victories. Whereas for Houston, this team has kind of been up and down all season long. Obviously, whenever you have talents like Nico and CJ and Will Anderson when healthy, this team is a good team. The issue is they do have a couple fundamental flaws, such as the offensive line being really bad. As long as the offensive line cannot be horrendous in this game, I do think the Texans should have a huge advantage and ultimately find a way to win this one. If the offensive line plays bad though, this game could be a little bit more close than what we might expect. With that all said though, I do expect Houston to move the ball effectively down the field, and I expect Tennessee to have a lot of issues offensively, maybe even giving some points to Houston. So with that all said, I have the final score 34 Houston to 19 Tennessee. Moving over to an NFC North matchup between the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears. This game should be a really interesting game because despite the record, the Chicago Bears are actually a really solid team overall. Sure, their offense has its issues. The offensive line is just god-awful, but defensively speaking, it's a really solid unit, and I do think Caleb is playing better than what maybe is being shown on the field or what is being shown in the statistics. Whereas for the Minnesota Vikings, it's kind of been an up and down season in a lot of ways. Obviously, the beginning was super duper hot, and then you had 2 losses, and lately it hasn't been as clean. That being said, they're still finding ways to win game against good and bad teams, so I kind of think that could potentially happen here as well. For the Bears, there just isn't that much consistency on the offensive end. There's certain possessions where the offense looks really good, and then there's other possessions where the offense just looks really bad. I expect the offensive play calling to be better than what it was last week because I thought last week it took a step forward, but it got a little bit too conservative. So hopefully that doesn't happen in this game. But ultimately speaking, this Minnesota team, in my opinion, is just far too talented on both the offensive and defensive end to potentially lose to a Bears team. I do think the Bears could keep this one extremely close, and this game could potentially come down to the very end. But ultimately speaking, I am going to pick the Minnesota Vikings to win this one 22-17. And then next up, we have an NFC East matchup between the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Commanders. Now, unfortunately for the Dallas Cowboys, this season has not gone the way that they thought it was going to go. They came into this year with expectations of, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons carrying this team to another 12-5 record, but that really hasn't been the case. They have gotten shown as a very flawed team even before the injuries, and now they're also a very injured team. So you put those two together and you make up what is one of the worst teams in the NFL. Whereas on the Washington side, they haven't been playing their best football lately, but this is still a really good team, even if this team is starting to have a couple issues, mainly offensively. But with that all said, they're going up against the Cowboys team that ranks dead last in a bunch of major statistics, both defensively and offensively. The Cowboys cannot run the ball, and they are also really bad defensively. So I do think Washington should have, for the most part, a bit of a field day here. This is also a good opportunity for Washington to kind of get payback for what the Dallas Cowboys have done to them the past couple years. Like, Dallas has pretty consistently beaten Washington and pretty consistently, at least the past couple years, humiliated Washington by trying to blow them out. So if you're a Washington team, you now have, the advantage in this game. The Cowboys are a bad team, an injured team, and honestly, they're on life support. So if you're Washington, you can, toy around and beat them and hopefully give them a beat down that reminds them of what they've done to you. So with that said, I'm going to pick Washington to win 38-20. Then we move over to another divisional matchup, this time between the New England Patriots and the Miami Dolphins. This game is really interesting for a number of different reasons. Obviously, both these teams are towards the bottom of their respective division and are pretty likely not going to make the playoffs. But I kind of feel like both these teams are starting to play their best football of the season season like right now. Like, I know New England isn't winning a bunch of games, but that's kind of to be expected with this team. But Drake May has really brought in a bunch of new life for this offense, and defensively speaking, they're starting to pick up their play as well. Whereas for the Miami Dolphins, it just really came down to health. Could they get Tua back? Could they get Tyreek Hill going? And they've kind of gotten that stuff going the past couple weeks. So now you're sitting here, both these two teams are playing at a very high level for what they've been doing this year, and they're going up against each other in a pretty pivotal matchup, at least for the Dolphins season. For New England, they've really struggled against really solid teams, and I do think Miami is a solid team despite what their record might say. Miami has gotten the offense going, Tua has gotten better, so I do expect this game to be a little bit of a lean towards Dolphins. I expect New England to play this one really close. Drake May is going to make a bunch of plays on that defense, but ultimately speaking, I do think Tyreek Hill will have a very solid game, and I think Jalen Waddle will as well. So with that said, I'm going to pick the Miami Dolphins to win 27-20. And then moving over to the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Carolina Panthers. Now, I know everyone is rooting for Carolina to win this one, myself included. Let's just be honest. We all want to see Bryce Young succeed, but this is a really tough matchup and honestly a really bad situation to be in if you're Carolina going up against a Chiefs team that is coming off their first loss. For starters, for the Chiefs, this is a really good game against a bad opponent that can kind of fine-tune your offense a tad bit. The offense hasn't been great, especially last week versus Buffalo. So now you're going up against a really bad opponent with a really bad defense. So hopefully they can kind of figure some things out offensively in this week. And defensively speaking, you're really not going to be challenged all that much. I know Bryce Young has played better, but he's played better against some of the worst teams in the NFL. So we'll have to kind of wait and see if that does translate in this one. But for Kansas City, I don't really think you're going to be tested all that much in this one. I do expect Kansas City to win this one pretty clean, and it probably should be over by the third-ish quarter. For the Panthers side of things, yes, the team is starting to play better. Yes, you're coming off a bye week, but this is a really tough matchup versus a really good and pissed off Chiefs team. For Carolina, I just kind of want to see them play a good version of what they can potentially become. You don't have to win the game to impress me. Just keep this one relatively close for at least half the game. Show some flashes in Bryce Young. Don't turn the ball over. And, you know, maybe pull off an upset, but that's pretty unlikely. I'm going to ultimately pick the Chiefs to win 30-14. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt. I'll be really quick, but I have started a brand new YouTube channel called Metro Stories. On this channel, we simply focus on actual stories of NFL teams and NFL players. So if that sort of stuff interests you, make sure to go ahead and check it out. It'll be in the description below as well as in the pinned comment. Go ahead and check it out. I think you might like it. Let's get back to the video though. Let's go ahead and move on now to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the New York Giants. Now this one is also a pretty interesting game because Tommy DeVito is now the starting quarterback for the New York Giants, which that is a whole saga in and out of itself. Whereas for the Buccaneers, it hasn't been a very good past couple weeks, but that's been mainly because of injuries. And now you're supposed to be getting Mike Evans potentially back in this game. So you're going up against a bad opponent that's starting their third string quarterback, and you get your best receiver back. So it kind of does heavily lean in favor of Tampa Bay. For the New York Giants, I don't think it was a bad idea to bench Daniel Jones. However, I think it was a dumb idea to start Tommy DeVito. I get it. They're probably trying to tank, but kind of feel like you're screwing over Drew Lock, and honestly putting Daniel Jones as the fourth string quarterback is, in my opinion, extremely disrespectful for a guy who seemingly has done everything right. Again, I'm not in the building. I don't know what's actually gone on there, but that's just kind of disrespectful and honestly just not a good look for a franchise. But with that said, they ultimately made the decision, and of course, we are going to have Tommy DeVito going up against Baker Mayfield, which in theory is a really fun matchup. I expect Tommy DeVito to, sling the ball around, throw some picks, throw some touchdowns, have a fun day, and that's kind of all we can ask for from, a third string quarterback. This isn't an easy matchup. Tampa Bay is a veteran team that has a defensive-minded coach, and their offense is really good when things are clicking, so I expect Tampa Bay to ultimately win this one pretty handily. I expect this one to be a big bounce back performance for a team that really could use one of those in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ultimately, I had the final score 34-12 in favor of Tampa Bay. But let's go ahead and talk about the Detroit Lions versus the Indianapolis Colts. Now, these past couple weeks, the Detroit Lions have been smoking teams left and right. The games have not been close at all. They destroyed Jacksonville, they destroyed Dallas, they've destroyed basically every team that's been put in front of them, but I don't expect them to do that this week. Indianapolis is actually a respectable team with an offense that, when it is clicking, is really good. I'm not saying the Colts are going to win this one, but I am expecting this one to be a much more close bout between these two pretty good teams. Obviously, the Lions are fantastic, but the Colts are, I would say, pretty good. I know their record isn't perfect, but I think a lot of that is just due to some inconsistent play from their quarterback room. In this matchup, though, this Lions offense is completely clicking, and this Colts defense is also playing relatively well. So I do expect a matchup of two really good units between the Colts defense and the Lions offense. I would say the Lions offense is way better than the Colts defense, but I think the Colts defense can also hold up their end of the deal in this game. Really, for me, it's just going to come down to whether or not Anthony Richardson can play good football. Can Anthony not turn the ball over? Can he not fumble the ball? Can he make the right reads, run properly, do all that sort of stuff? And if he could do so, I think the Colts have a chance in this matchup. But because we haven't seen him play consistent football for, a long stretch of the season, at least this year, I'm kind of hesitant to pick an Indianapolis team over a Detroit team that has shown the consistency in both the run game and in Jared Goff. So because of that, I expect a close game, but ultimately I am going to pick the Lions to win 24-16. Then we begin our 3 o'clock window, first up with the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. The Broncos are starting to play the best football of their season. The past couple weeks have been really good. Even in some losses, they've played really well. Whereas this Las Vegas team, their season is completely down the drain. They are just really bad on basically both ends. I do think Max Crosby could have a good game against this Broncos team. These are two teams that know each other quite well, so this isn't going to be some sort of big blowout game for the Denver Broncos like what the Broncos were able to do last week. But I also do expect there to be a couple of issues with this Broncos offense going up against the Raiders defense that does have some positive playmakers. That all said, though, I don't expect Denver to be really threatened by the offense of Las Vegas. Denver has one of the best defenses out there, whereas the Raiders have one of the worst offenses out there. So I expect the Denver Broncos to be in a close game, but not necessarily ever feel threatened in this matchup. As long as you can get a lead early, I think they'll be able to maintain it throughout the entire game, because I don't think that offense in Las Vegas is really going to threaten that Broncos defense basically the entire day. So because of that, I am going to pick the Denver Broncos to win a low scoring affair, but I would say a pretty easy, comfortable win, 21-13. Then we have one of the biggest and maybe most important matchups of the day between the Arizona Cardinals and the Seattle Seahawks. I kind of feel like the beginning of the week is really kind of boring and not that interesting, but when we get into this 3 o'clock window, and basically every game from 3 o'clock to Monday is actually really interesting and could honestly go either way. And this is another one of those matchups between the Seahawks, who just got their biggest victory of the season, going up against the Cardinals that are coming off a bye. For Seattle, in my opinion, it is almost imperative that you slow down Kyler Murray. Don't let Kyler Murray get out of the pocket, make big explosive plays. Keep him in the pocket, keep him contained. A solid secondary play, let your pass rushers get in there. Don't really know if you want to blitz too much, because Kyler Murray is pretty good against the blitz, but I do think you got to toss it in there here and there. Ultimately, this is a really tough matchup to pick because I really like both these teams, and I think Arizona is maybe the better team right now, but Seattle is coming off a very emotional high against the San Francisco 49ers. The question then becomes, does that emotional high carry over into this week in a positive way or a negative way? Because I feel like Seattle really needs this victory because, you just beat, in my opinion, the best team in the division in the 49ers, and now you're going up against the division leader in the Arizona Cardinals. This is a really important matchup for the Seahawks team to actually find a way to win. As for Arizona, if you win this game, you increase your lead within the division, and you probably feel really good about what's the future for this team, at least this year. This one is honestly a complete toss-up. I think either team could win this one, but I am just going to go ahead and pick the Seattle Seahawks to win this game. I think that emotional high could carry them into this one with Geno Smith playing some really good football. I have the final score 22-17. We move over to the Green Bay Packers versus the San Francisco 49ers, a rematch of what we saw in the playoffs, which was a fun and epic game then, and I expect it to be another one of those games here. Both these teams have not played their best brand of football, at least in my opinion, quite yet. Green Bay had a really close, narrow victory versus Green Bay and just have not looked like themselves the past couple weeks. San Francisco hasn't looked like themselves the entire year. I expect Green Bay to continue to follow the formula that has kind of exposed this 49ers offense and sort of their weaknesses, and I expect Green Bay to fully try to exploit every little advantage they can physically get. Whereas for San Francisco, I think they can keep this game close just because of the pure talent that is on both the offense and defense. As long as Jordan Love doesn't turn the ball over, I really do think Green Bay can cruise to a victory in this one. But if Jordan Love does turn the ball over, which he has shown the inability sometimes to not turn the ball over, he does turn the ball over in this one could get a lot more interesting, and I think San Francisco could easily swoop in and get a victory. Both these offenses can be extremely explosive, make big plays, but they can also be really bad in certain spots. So that's kind of what makes this game extremely interesting. Both these teams desperately need this win. For San Francisco, if you lose, it's going to be really difficult to even make the wild card. As for Green Bay, if you lose, it's going to be really difficult to even try to come close to winning the division. Ultimately, I'm going to pick the team that I think has played better football this season, and in my opinion, that is the Green Bay Packers. They've played better football, and I think that there is a bit of a script to follow in order to beat this Niners team that I do think Green Bay could actually try to implement. At the final score, 31 Green Bay, 28 San Francisco. Then we have our 7 o'clock game between the LA Rams and the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, LA Rams, in theory, are not a good team record-wise, but when you watch them actually play and you realize the talent that is on these teams, it's a damn good team. Their pass rush is awesome. Their defense is improving basically every single week. Offensively, they finally have their playmakers fully going with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, with Stafford starting to play some of his best football. This makes this Rams team extremely dangerous. This Rams team does not necessarily have a big time win on their resume. They haven't quite yet gotten that big, massive matchup to really show off what they could do. And here we are versus the Philadelphia Eagles at 7 o'clock, going at your home against what is, in my opinion, the second best team in the NFC. So if you win this one, all of a sudden you are looking like a legitimate threat in the playoff race. But if you lose this one, things get a little bit more bad for you. Philadelphia is an awesome team. They have a lot of great players. AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith. The offense feels like it's kind of figured out who they want to be and what they want to do. They don't want to necessarily create big chunk plays, with the passing game. If they can, and they will definitely take it. But they're just really a team that wants to rely on the ground game with Saquon Barkley's legs, Jalen Hurts' legs, and when they can get those big chunk plays from AJ Brown, they're going to take it. And because this Rams defense is still a little bit skeptical or a little bit susceptible in the secondary, I do think there is some explosive plays eventually available for this Eagles team. For me, it's just going to come down to which offense shows up more, because I don't expect either defense to really get a whole bunch of stops. I kind of expect a big high-scoring game that goes potentially late into the fourth quarter. I do think the defenses will get some stops and will create some potential turnovers, but ultimately I expect this one to kind of be a bit of a shootout. I have Philadelphia ultimately finding a way to win this one 33-30 to continue their lead in the NFC East. And before we actually get into the Monday Night Football game, we actually have 6 teams on byes this week. Those teams being the Saints, the Bengals, the Bills, the Falcons, the Jaguars, and the New York Jets. So for all those teams, hopefully they can feel better, get some healthy players back, and hopefully they can come back and play their best football after the bye week. But let's go ahead and move on to the Baltimore Ravens versus the LA Chargers. For the Chargers, this is the best opportunity that you've had all season to prove your value, to prove if you're actually a potential contender, at least. The Chargers have a good record, but they haven't necessarily beaten a good team record-wise yet, and now you get a chance to do so against the Baltimore Ravens. Whereas if you're the Ravens, this feels like a bit of a must-win game for you, because you just have some really questionable losses on your resume. They've had losses to teams like Las Vegas, which is a really weird one. You've had losses now recently to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, you want to find a way to win these games because you want to win the division, and they haven't quite yet been able to do it consistently. This team has kind of been up and down, sort of like Houston and Green Bay and even San Francisco sometimes, but when they're at their highest, in my opinion, they're one of the best teams in the NFL. So now they get an opportunity to prove it against a really good LA Chargers team, and I think that they will find a way to do so. Ultimately speaking, I just trust this Ravens offense a tad bit more than the Chargers offense. I think when the Chargers offense is clicking, it's really good, but when this Ravens offense is clicking, it's incredibly good. Both these defenses are good. I would say the Chargers defense is way better, but I think the Ravens offense is also way better. So in my opinion, I think offense is more important than defense, especially when your defense can be sometimes a little bit up and down, such as this Chargers defense. So because of that, I am going to trust Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry to win this one. I have the final score 20-18. Real quick, here is a summary of all of my picks. You guys can see everything that I talked about in this video. But if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. And I love you guys. Peace.